Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. This morning, we're going to back up just a little bit and remind the listeners that near the end of the program yesterday, the author of this book, Romanism and the Reformation, Henry Grattan Guinness, began to describe the second phase of the rise of Antichrist as that time interval extending between the fall of the Western Empire of Rome and the development of the papal theocracy in the 11th century under Gregory VII. In the process of doing that, he reminds us how the interpreters of Bible prophecy, those who wrote voluminously about the prophecies of Daniel and Paul and John, all interpreted those prophecies in the historical sense. They were historicists. The word futurism had never been heard to this time. They were all futurists, just like those expositors of the first period of the rise of Antichrist that we covered earlier. Now, speaking of these interpreters, on page 205, the first full paragraph, page 205 in the book, it says the interval during which these interpreters lived was marked by the steady rise, but not by the full manifestation of the papacy. Two notions contributed powerfully to prevent their recognizing in the imperfectly developed papacy the predicted man of sin. They falsely imagined, I will insert, that as the Eastern Empire of Rome, seated at Constantinople, still continued the prophetic let, or the hindrance, or the restrainer to the manifestation of Antichrist, and that it remained, completely overlooking the fact that the anti-Christian power foretold in prophecy is definitely linked to the seven-hilled city of Rome, and thus with the fall of the Western Empire and the apostasy of the Latin or Western Church. They had a false hope. Something had happened to Christianity at this time, whereas before the Christians were fervently discussing this rise of Antichrist that would follow immediately upon the heels of the removal of the restrainer, the Caesar of the pagan Roman Empire. And when the emperor left Rome, the city of seven hills, prophesied in the scripture, and moved the capital of the empire to Constantinople in the east, they did not see the immediate rise of the opposer of Christ, the tyrant, the persecutor, the Antichrist, as they believed he would be, and correctly so. The papacy was already in place in the form of the Bishop of Rome. We have to remember that through all the books that we've read here on Inquisition Update, many of them who cover this period of time indicate that the future Antichrist, the Bishop of Rome, was already in bed with the emperor. That the emperors of the pagan Roman Empire, after Rome decided, in order to prevent the destruction of the Roman Empire through religious strife, seeing that the Christians could not be defeated, that they were steadfast in their faith, rather than to let that religious component continue to erode the Roman Empire, that as a last-ditch effort to save the empire, the the Caesars would embrace Christianity and simply just lump Jesus Christ in with the already existing pantheon of gods that were worshipped in the pagan Roman Empire, as a way to establish peace and solidarity and unity and safety in the empire. You can see the Emperor Constantine as the first true ecumenist, according to the Roman definition, according to the definition that still exists today. The ecumenical movement of Vatican Council II is simply a reenactment of what Caesar did by just taking the attitude of the Christians, well, we can't kill them all, we can't feed them all to the lions, we can't burn them all on stakes. If you can't beat them, join them. Or better yet, just absorb them. And let them just be an addition to the gods that are already worshipped in the pagan Roman Empire. That's exactly what we're seeing today in the ecumenical movement. If you can't silence God's word, then just beat them up with wars and rumors of wars for centuries. And if you still can't beat them, you have to come to the conclusion that the only way is to just absorb them and lump them in with the entire pantheon of gods in the world. That's what the ecumenical movement is today. If you know what the ecumenical movement of Vatican Council II really embraces, that's the unity of all the religions of the world under one ecclesiastical head, the Pope of Rome, the current Caesar of the papal Roman Empire. He calls himself Pontifex Maximus, the very same term, the very same office held by the Caesars. Pontifex Maximus, the bridge builder. And he's building us a bridge, all right, a bridge to perdition. Now, the Bishop of Rome was a courtesan in the Caesar's palace. They worked together to unite the empire. The Bishop of Rome had a perfect hand in this pagan ecumenical movement that Caesar inspired. And it should be noted that since there was such a close and unholy relationship between the Bishop of Rome and the Caesar of the empire, that we can clearly understand that the seat of Antichrist was already within the Caesarean palace. And when Constantine moved his seat of government from Rome to Constantinople, that left that Bishop of Rome, that precursor to Antichrist, already in power in Rome. And why didn't the Christians recognize that that power was now manifest in the world, in the seven-hilled city of Rome? Well, because they erroneously believed that the Caesar, the restrainer, even though he was no longer in Rome but in Constantinople, he was still restraining the rise of Antichrist. And the subtle serpent that deceived Eve, which is the power behind the papacy, the Bishop of Rome at this time, knew he had to lay low for a while. The Christians were too vigilant. So the papacy could not stand up in his full blasphemous position in the world. His full persecuting and blasphemous position in the world. And so the Bishop of Rome grew from almost nothing, a virtual subject of the Caesars, slowly, by degrees. And in the interim, the Christians went to sleep. And he continues now in the second full paragraph on page 205. Henry Grattan Guinness says, two notions contributed powerfully to prevent the Christians recognizing in the imperfectly developed papacy the predicted man of sin. They imagined that as the Eastern Empire of Rome, seated at Constantinople, still continued, the let, the hindrance, or the restrainer to the manifestation of Antichrist. And that power, that Caesar, remained. They completely overlooked the fact that the anti-Christian power foretold in the prophecy is definitely linked to the seven-hilled city of Rome. And thus, with the fall of the Western Empire and the apostasy of the Latin or Western Church, Paul told it straight. When you see the restrainer taken out of the way from the seven-hilled city, then you'll know the Antichrist is in power. And that's exactly the way it went down. But the Christians didn't see the full manifestation of Antichrist. He wasn't clearly defined by his actions and his blasphemies. The Bishop of Rome was growing steadily but slowly. And so the Christians went to sleep. And he continues now in the last full paragraph on page 205. He says, then they spiritualized and explained away a great deal of prophecy and supposed that they were living in the millennium and that the Antichrist would not be manifested till the brief outbreak of evil at the close. There is the first hint of futurism being articulated by the early Christians. Prior to this, not one mention of futurism is indicated. They were all historicists. But because the papacy failed to fully manifest its prophetic character, the Christians became confused. They were expecting a tyrant, one who would kill and persecute Christians far worse than any Caesar ever did. Remember, they prayed, knowing that this Antichrist power would replace the Caesars. They prayed for the long life of the Caesars. They prayed for the extended life of the empire. And when Constantine left Rome and went to Constantinople, and the Antichrist stood up in his place, a mere bishop of Rome, not fully manifesting the prophesied character of the Antichrist, they went to sleep. We must be living in the millennium. This persecuting power must not, in reality, come to fruition until a brief period at the close of the age. Isn't that what we believe today? Being completely asleep, failing to see all throughout the Christian era in a proper historical context of the prophecies, that Antichrist, that blasphemous power, that killing and persecuting power has been among us for nearly 1,800 years. And that Antichrist won't come until the very end. He continues, he says, this false notion had fatal consequences. The false notion of futurism had fatal consequences, both then and now. Fatal consequences. While they were asleep, thinking Antichrist wouldn't come until the end of time, the papacy was growing up among them, slowly at first, meekly at first, but only centuries later would express its full prophetic Antichrist blasphemous character. Gave Satan plenty of time to allow the Christians to go to sleep, to make other interpretations, not historicists' interpretations of the prophecy, but futurists. What a grievous error. What a fatal mistake. It says, while these interpreters, in common with the generality of Christians at their period, were looking for the advent of the man of sin in the distant future, he stole unperceived into their midst and usurped the place of Christ over his unwatchful flock. Unbelievable. And it was so successful, Rome's just reenacting this deception today. It began 3 and no more than 4 generations ago, back in the 1800s. Futurism. The papacy's not the Antichrist. Why, he's the man of God, a vicar of Christ. He's the great high priest of Christianity. He preaches Jesus, doesn't he? Why, you can't believe that Pope is the Antichrist of the Bible. Antichrist doesn't come until the very last period of time before Christ returns. You can't be a Christian to say that the Pope is the Antichrist. You can't be a Christian to say that you believe what the Protestant Reformers and every Christian all the way back to the first century church the last 3 generations of futurists have deceived the whole world. And don't forget, this author has already proven that futurism is the Roman Catholic belief, not the Protestant. To be a Protestant, you must be a historicist. You must see the Antichrist in the papacy. The Protestants never changed their minds. They only were strengthened in that belief as the Protestant Reformation continued. They had it right, and they knew it. History confirmed it. No, the new kid on the prophetic interpretation block, the new kid in town is futurism. At least it is the new kid in town in the evangelical churches, because all their forebears were historicists. They have departed from the faith. They're now Roman Catholic in their belief. And why did the papacy foist this futurist, phony facade? Why, to protect the papacy, the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist. All throughout the Christian era, he's been fulfilling his blasphemous Antichrist role. And to keep Roman Catholics from flooding out of the church with that realization, with the Protestant realization, they said, now wait a minute, don't get up from the pews. Hear me out. The papacy's not the Antichrist. The Antichrist comes in the future, just before Christ's return. And so they sat back down, and Rome continued her business. She still had the support of some. But trust me, at that time there were not many that ignorant, and they left in droves. And they nearly destroyed Antichrist by simply turning their back on him. But the unwatchful flock, even then, began to believe in futurism, and that bought time for the papacy to gather up strength, to gather up momentum, to gather up following, to deceive God's people, and then slowly but surely began to demonstrate and to manifest his true prophetic Antichrist role in the world. And we're subject to the very same evil today. We believe Antichrist is in the future. It's not the Pope, so we must ecumenically reunite with Rome in the name of peace and unity and safety to save the Christian empire. Now, before we leave this medieval period, says Grattan Guinness, there are three remarkable testimonies to which we must just refer. Gregory the Great, listen to this. Isn't this just how God works? Here in this case, God makes an absolute mockery, a self-testimony by the papacy. Gregory the Great, one of the most venerated popes in all Roman Catholic history. Here's what he says. Gregory the Great in the 6th century declared before Christendom that whosoever called himself universal bishop or universal priest was the precursor of Antichrist. Out of his own mouth, one of the most venerated popes in all Roman Catholic history, Gregory the Great. They don't call him great just because he was mediocre, just because he was Antichrist. They call him great because he is the great example of the popes in the Roman Catholic Church. And he said with his own mouth before all of Christendom, whoever calls himself the universal bishop or the universal priest was the precursor of Antichrist. And in this he was doubtless perfectly correct, says Grattan Guinness. And when Boniface III, shortly after the death of Gregory the Great, took this title in the year 607, he became the precursor of Antichrist as fully revealed under Boniface VIII. The papacy grew by stages, first acknowledging that whoever took the term universal bishop was an Antichrist, and a precursor of Antichrist. His successor took that title, and Boniface VIII, his successor, fully manifested that wicked, that son of perdition, that deceiveth the whole world. We'll be back right after this.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left-behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Back from the break, you're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to support the program, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. We thank Brother Nicholas for seeing the importance of Inquisition Update and bringing it to God's people. Now, Antichrist didn't fully manifest himself. God's people went to sleep. We must have interpreted wrongly. Antichrist must not come till the end. Well, since he's not a concern, we can take a breather. But while they were breathing deeply, Antichrist was growing in their midst, building power, influence, setting up the dynasty of Antichrist, that predicted by Daniel, Paul, and John, right in their midst. Now, I mentioned earlier that many, most of the books that I've read over the last, 8-9 years here on Inquisition Update, how long has it been, Nicholas? It's getting on long in the tooth now. All the works we've read talked about the slow growth of the papacy. From just a bishop of bishops, no big deal, just a bishop among bishops, and a subject to the Roman Caesar, then growing to become a courtesan in the court of Caesar, then to become bishop of bishops, and then to the point of even appointing the Caesars, and then finally declaring himself the God of this world. By degrees, over centuries and centuries, rose this Antichrist power. He's fully manifested in the world now. No one need be deceived what role he plays, what prophetic role he plays, but the whole world is deceived. The whole world wonders after the beast. And you want to know what the real wonder is? It's a wonder, given all the perfect descriptions in the Bible of this man of sin, giving all of its manifest fulfillments throughout history. It's a wonder that anybody believes him. How could ecumenism be a reality in the world, especially in the Protestant churches? Now, continuing, he says, Gerbert Reams, before the year 1000, said of the Pope sitting in his lofty throne in gold and purple, that if destitute of charity, he, the Pope, was Antichrist sitting in the temple of God. If destitute of charity, if destitute of love, the Pope was the Antichrist sitting in the temple of God. If you just remove his apparent loving character, and look at everything else about the papacy, you can come to no other conclusion but that he is the Antichrist sitting in the temple of God. What this Gerbert of Reims is simply saying is, as long as he pretends to be loving, and we believe it, then he's no longer Antichrist sitting in the temple of God. But as soon as he loses that charitable facade, as soon as he begins to show his true satanic, hateful, vengeful, vindictive, persecutorial, war-making power and affect, then you have your Antichrist sitting in the temple of God. The facade of love and charity is the only thing that deceived Gerbert of Reims. Now, lastly, Berenger, in the 11th century, referring to the Pope's enforcement at that time of the doctrine of transubstantiation. Yes, this is where the Pope can, or the priest, can be the creator of their creator by simply saying the 5 magic Latin words, in hoc est corpus meus, and all of a sudden the bread becomes the literal blood, body, soul, and divinity of Christ to be offered again, a perpetual sacrifice on the altar of the Roman Catholic Church. The great blasphemy of the Roman Catholic Church. He says, lastly, Berenger in the 11th century, referring to the Pope's enforcement at that time of the doctrine of transubstantiation, affirmed the Roman See to be not the apostolic seat, but the very seat of Satan. Did you hear that? He defined the papacy as the very seat of Satan. Now, a lot of people have criticized me over the years saying, Tom, why do you call the Roman Catholic Church the synagogue of Satan? Well, you might ask the same question of this very, very venerable Protestant pastor, researcher, prophecy expert, man of God, Henry Grattan Guinness, why he called it the seat of Satan. And he says, thus gradually did an understanding of the true character of the papacy dawn upon the Christian church of this period. And I will simply add that they should have known all along. It took 500 years for it to finally dawn on God's people that Antichrist had already been among them for 500 years. You see anything similar with what we have today? Antichrist has been in the world for nearly 1,800 years now, and the Christians are still debating whether he is the seat of Satan. It's still dawning on the Christian church. As a matter of fact, the dawn has reversed, and we've gone back into ecumenical darkness. Point number 3. We will now, in the third and last place, briefly consider the history of prophetic interpretation from the time of Gregory VII in the 11th century to the Reformation in the 16th. From the 11th century to the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. The pontificate of Gregory VII was the era of papal unveiling. At this time, the Pope dropped the mask of the shepherd and exchanged the shepherd's crook for the scepter and the sword. The accession of Gregory VII in 1073 is a great landmark in the Church's history, and I will add that you can easily remember what period of time we're talking about because of the great schism of 1054 AD, when the Eastern sect warring with that Antichrist power in Rome, broke away. It was only 19 years later that Gregory VII came to power and became a landmark in Roman Catholic Church history. Gregory VII, or Hildebrand as he was called, created, as we have stated before, the papal theocracy. Do you know what this means? He claimed for himself, in the name of God, absolute and unlimited dominion over all the states of Christendom as the successor of St. Peter and the vicar or the replacement of Christ upon earth. There's the full manifestation of Antichrist. Were the Christians still wondering after the beast? The popes who came after him pushed these claims to their utmost extent. At the end of the 13th century, they assumed the proud title of Masters of the World. Three names stand out conspicuously in the 3 middle centuries of this dark period. Gregory VII, I will add the word Antichrist, Gregory VII, Antichrist Innocent III, and Antichrist Boniface VIII. The historian of the Middle Ages well says, quote, as Gregory VII appears the most usurping of mankind till we read the history of Innocent III, so Innocent III is thrown into the shade by the supreme audacity of Boniface VIII. Here we are seeing 3 landmarks in the ascendancy of the papacy. Gregory VII, Innocent III, and Boniface VIII. And what makes them so significant? Each one paling the other in its blasphemies. He says, in those days lived the Italian poet Dante. He describes his age with extraordinary power. Writing in the 13th century and in Italy, he painted the papacy as the world beheld it then. And what did the world see? It saw in the papacy the usurping man of sin, and in the Church of Rome, the Babylon of the Apocalypse. Mark, even the world saw it. It wasn't just the Christians, the very elect. The whole world saw it and acknowledged it. And here a few lines from Dante's immortal poem on hell, purgatory, and paradise. Quote, woe to thee, Simon Magus! Woe to you, his wretched followers, who the things of God, which should be wedded unto goodness, them rapacious as ye are, do prostitute for gold and silver. Unquote. He acknowledges Simon Magus as the head, the leader, the first pope of the Roman Catholic Church. And I will cover that as I've already covered it on this program, Inquisition Update. I'll do it again. Simon Magus. Dante recognizes Simon Magus as the Simon Peter who came to Rome and who started the Roman Catholic Church and who was eventually crucified upside down. Read Acts chapter 8, how he was first manifest to be the man of sin in Acts chapter 8. Read it for yourself. When the apostle came face to face with a man who was believed to be a Christian, who had been baptized, and who then, inexplicably, tried to buy an apostleship. Tried to buy this cute little magic trick that Peter was demonstrating when he laid his hands on the people and they imparted to them the Holy Spirit. It was then that Simon Magus revealed that he was not a man of God. He was the man of sin. And he was destined to a prophetic role in the world. He says, I perceive that thou art of the gall of bitterness and the fetters of bondage. your money, and you perish. And that in itself was a prophecy of the papacy. You and your money perish together. And that will occur when Christ returns. Simon Magus and all of his successors and all of the incalculable wealth that they have stolen and extorted from God's people throughout all the centuries will go to the lake of fire. Listen again to the words of Dante. Speaking of the papacy, woe to thee, Simon Magus! Woe to you, his wretched followers, who the things of God which should be wedded unto goodness, them rapacious as ye are, do prostitute for gold and silver. Your avarice o'ercast the world with mourning, underfoot treading the good, and raising up bad men. Of shepherds like to you, the evangelist was ware, when her who sitteth upon the waves, with kings in filthy whoredom he beheld, she who with 7 heads towered at her birth, and from 10 horns her proof of glory drew, long as her spouse in virtue took delight. Of gold and silver ye have made your gods, differing wherein from the idolater, but that he worships one, and ye 100. O Constantine, to how much ill gave birth, not thy conversion, but that plenteous dower, which the first wealthy father gained from thee. Acknowledging that it was Constantine who gave the Bishop of Rome all of his power, all of his dowry. The Bishop of Rome, the Antichrist, got it from him. Was Dante confused? Not on your life. In his poem on Paradise, he says, my place he who usurps on earth hath made a common sewer of puddle and of blood. No purpose was of ours, that the keys which were vouchsafed me should have for ensigns served unto the banners that do levy war on the baptized, nor I for sigil mark set upon sold and lying privileges, which makes me oft to bicker and turn red. In shepherd's clothing, greedy wolves below range wide over the pastures. Arm of God, why longer sleepest thou? Dante was pleading with God to put an end to Antichrist. To put an end to the bloodshed. To put an end of this indiscriminate use of the so-called keys. To bind and to loose and to levy war on the baptized, on the true God-believing baptized Christians. He even speaks of their indulgences, selling lying privileges, indicating that it's so apostate it makes him blush, to turn red. And finally indicated that he in shepherd's clothing is nothing but a greedy wolf, ranging over the pastures of God over his sheep, making merchandise of them. And then he last pleads, Arm of God, why longer sleepest thou? This wisdom of Dante is 1,000 years old. And God's people today, ranging over God's pastures, believe this persecutor to be a man of God. How dark is the night. And in the end of his poem on paradise, he refers to the Apostle John as the seer, that ere he died, saw all the grievous times of the fair bride, who with the lance and nails was won. Acknowledging John the Revelator as the seer of God, seeing the entire Christian era from beginning to end and describing it in detail, describing the entire prophetic life of the bride, the chosen, the elect of God, who were saved by the lance and the nails that pierced his precious divine flesh and won us all. You will observe that these beautiful and touching words recognize the historical interpretation of the Apocalypse. Even Dante understood the historical significance, the correct historical interpretation of the prophecies. What in God's name is wrong with God's house today? The Apostle John, according to Dante, saw all the grievous times through which the church was destined to pass. Not just a short, brief period at the end of time. He saw the whole thing. And what Dante saw, the Albigenses saw, and the Waldenses. What wonder was there in this? Here the author makes reference to the wonder. And the whole world wonders after the beast. This here is what the author, Grattan Guinness, is talking about. He says, what wonder is there in this? Would not the wonder have been had the saints remained blind to a fulfillment of prophecy so plain and palpable that even the world recognized it? I've said before, the only wonder is that anybody still believes the papacy is a man of God and not the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist of the Bible. Let me read it again. What wonder was there in this? Would not the wonder have been had the saints remained blind to the fulfillment of prophecy so plain and palpable that even the world recognized it? And let me tell you, the whole world these days fails to recognize the fulfillment of the prophecy that was so plainly and palpably fulfilled in the papacy. In the sunny south of France, in Provence and Catalonia, lived the Albigenses. They were a civilized and highly educated people. Among these people, there sprang up an extensive revival of true Christianity. And one of its natural effects was a bold testimony against the abominations of apostate Rome. Right here, you can just see this author, Henry Grattan Guinness, standing over his lectern, looking down and putting his hand on a book. He says, here is Sismondi's History of the Albigenses. On page 7, he says of them and of the Vaudois, quote, all agreed in regarding the Church of Rome as having absolutely perverted Christianity and in maintaining that it was she who was designated in the Apocalypse by the name of the whore of Babylon, unquote. Rome could not endure this testimony. She drew her deadly sword and waged war against those who bore it. In the year 1208, Albigenses were murderously persecuted. Innocent III, what a mockery! To call himself innocent. Antichrist Innocent III employed the Crusaders in his dreadful work. The war of extermination was denominated sacred. It was a holy Roman crusade against these truth-tellers in France, these Albigenses. They remind you of a prophecy. And those who kill you will think they're doing God's service. They will think they're doing a holy, a sacred work. Again, he said the Albigenses were murderously persecuted.
Gold and silver is tremendously undervalued. Global demand vastly exceeds mine supply by more than 60% annually. There is little in the financial world more certain than a coming explosion in the prices of gold and silver. The U.S. dollar continues to lose value and respect as the world's reserve currency. Our nation faces challenges on many fronts, and a day doesn't pass without another economist bringing forth warnings of impending economic calamity. There has never been a better time than right now to acquire physical gold and silver. Discount Gold and Silver Trading was founded on the principles of truth and honesty. We believe in providing a quality product, quality service, and most importantly, competitive pricing. We provide all forms of precious metals, including American gold, silver, platinum, and rare investment and circulated coins. Silver bars, rounds, and 90% silver bags are on hand for the silver investor. Gold self-directed IRAs are available. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375